Hello, in this video I'm going to discuss technical aspects of my tool, as well as techniques I used, such as data assets, C++, blueprints, and UMG. Now, the first thing I want to talk about will involve the parent and child relationship that I have with this tool. Since I'm going to be creating quite a lot of widgets due to UMG implementation, I decided that I would use an approach where there would be one single parent widget, which does most of the code, which the children widgets can then follow. This way it will save on memory, as well as lower file size tremendously. To create the parent widget, I first went into C++ and added two functions which would check for input. Data assets are a way to store information that can be used between different objects within the Unreal Editor, and to utilize them to my fullest, I created some structs for Xbox, PlayStation and keyboard, which will all contain textures the user can input. Going back to the function I just mentioned, this function passes through parameters, and depending on what the parameter is, it will direct the widget to a specific texture in the data asset. Once this runs, the texture will switch to it, and with the help from the AnyKey node, I can then create a simple blueprint structure which checks for a specific string, and either tells the widget to switch to an Xbox texture, or rather a keyboard one. When it came to creating the children widgets, all I had to simply do was create children, where I could then give them their own corresponding indexes and also give them a blueprint display name. So when the user uses my tool, they see a more user-friendly name rather than the file version. To then implement these widgets within your projects, you first want to go into your user widget, where you can then find the dynamic inputs UI category and select a widget of your choice. Once the widget has been added, you can then select a ball which will either show a gamepad or a keyboard icon. This way it will save having to go into the game itself to check if the textures fit properly. To create the visual functionality of this widget, I first of all had to create a separate data asset which incorporated every placeholder texture that I have created. Then, in native pre-construct, whenever a ball is selected, it will then select a specific Xbox or keyboard texture. However, if that texture is null, then it doesn't change the image whatsoever to keep my tool professional. Since I want this tool to be as user-friendly as possible, I decided to implement a utility widget within it. This is where the user will be spending most of their time within the tool, in an attempt to make it as user-friendly as possible. To begin with, you'll see the home page. This page has a diagram with a slew of buttons that redirect you to other canvases. To begin, however, you will notice a sound playing when you hover over these buttons. This sound has a random pitch whenever you hover over them, and I created this effect by simply creating a randomizer node within my meta sound. Now, to get these buttons to switch to different canvases, I first of all created a widget switcher. Then, I created a small function which would switch the canvas with the widget switcher, which takes a parameter and switches canvases based on it. Once I implemented this with every button, including the back buttons, you will then be taken to a new canvas with other buttons, as well as a progress bar. These buttons then add images to the same data asset that the widgets use by getting a selected texture from the content drawer. It would then display the chosen image on the button's brush and would also update the progress bar as well as text alongside it. To create this within code, I first of all created a function which would get the selected object in an array, where it would then convert it to a texture and add it to the data asset. It will then update the brush of the button with a separate function which simply changes the texture of a specific button with a texture parameter. I also created a save function which will mark the data asset as dirty, where it then saves a U package of the data asset, so when you leave the project and go back to it, everything is still saved. Finally, the data asset index will be examined, and if it was null before it got modified, the progress bar function will be called, which increases the percentage bar with each new button that gets added. This percentage value also gets saved as a separate integer, which will be used later on. Now, to link these functions within Blueprint, I had to create an on-click event for each button, where it then links all of them up with one function, which does most of the behavior needed. All I had to do then was fill in particular parameters, and each button now functioned properly. When you go back to the home page, you'll also notice that textures change colour depending on how far you've progressed with each section of the utility widget. This was done by utilising RGB values as well as the percentage variable I mentioned earlier. Finally, when you go launch your utility widget back up, everything will show up as if it all got saved. This is an illusion, however, as instead I created 3 for loops which would check for texture indexes, and if they aren't null, it will update the percentage bars as well as buttons by the information gathered. And now when you go into the game itself, you'll notice that the UI switches effortlessly whenever a different input gets detected. Thank you for watching.